Chapter 15 of Lavender and Old Lace. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Bridget. Lavender and Old Lace by Myrtle Reed. Chapter 15. The Secret and the Dream. Ruth easily became accustomed to the quiet life at Miss Ainslie's, and gradually lost all desire to go back to the city. "You're spoiling me," she said one day. "I don't want to go back to town. I don't want to work. I don't want to do anything but sit still and look at you. I didn't know I was so lazy." "You're not lazy, dear," answered Miss Ainslie. "You were tired, and you didn't know how tired you were." Winfield practically lived there. In the morning he sat in the garden reading the paper, while Ruth helped about the house. She insisted upon learning to cook, and he ate many an unfamiliar dish, heroically proclaiming that it was good. "You must never doubt his love," Miss Ainslie said, "for those biscuits well, dear, you know they were not just right." The amateur cook laughed outright at the gentle criticism. "They were awful," she admitted, "but I'm going to keep at it until I learn how." The upper part of the house was divided into 4 rooms, with windows on all sides. One of the front rooms, with north and east windows, was Miss Ainslie's, while the one just back of it, with south and east windows, was a sitting room. "I keep my prettiest things up here, dear," she explained to Ruth, "for I don't want people to think I'm crazy." Ruth caught her breath as she entered the room, for rare tapestries hung on the walls, and priceless rugs lay on the floor. The furniture, like that downstairs, was colonial mahogany, highly polished, with here and there a chair or table of foreign workmanship. There was a cabinet, filled with rare china, a marquetry table, and a chair of teakwood, inlaid with mother of pearl. In one corner of the room was a large chest of sandalwood, inlaid with pearl and partly covered by a wonderful antique rug. The world had seemingly given up its beauty to adorn Miss Ainslie's room. She had pottery from Mexico, China and Japan, strange things from Egypt and the Nile, and all the Oriental splendour of India and Persia. Ruth wisely asked no questions, but, as once before, she said hesitating, "They were given to me by a friend." After much pleading on Ruth's part, Winfield was allowed to come to the sitting room. "He'll think I'm silly, dear," she said, flushing, but, on the contrary, he shared Ruth's delight and won Miss Ainslie's gratitude by his appreciation of her treasures. Day by day, the singular attraction grew between them. She loved Ruth, but she took him unreservedly into her heart. Ruth observed, idly, that she never called him Mr. Winfield. At first, she spoke of him as "your friend," and afterward, when he had asked her to, she yielded, with an adorable shyness, and called him Carl. He, too, had eaten of the lotus and lost the desire to go back to town. From the hilltop they could see the yellow fields and hear the soft melody of reaping from the valley around them. He and Ruth often walked together, but Miss Ainslie never would go with them. She stayed quietly at home, as she had done for many years. Every night, when the last train came from the city, she put a lighted candle in her front window, always using the candlestick of solid silver, covered with fretwork in intricate design. If Winfield was there, she managed to have him and Ruth in another room. At 10:30 she took it away, sighing softly as she put out the light. Ruth wondered, but said nothing, even to Winfield. The grain in the valley was bound in sheaves, and the first colour came on the maples, sometimes in a delicate flush, or a flash of gold, and sometimes like a blood-red wound. One morning, when Miss Ainslie came downstairs, Ruth was startled at the change in her. The quick, light step was slow and heavy, the broad, straight shoulders drooped a little, and her face, while still dimpled and fair, was subtly different. Behind her deep, violet eyes lay an unspeakable sadness, and the rosy tints were gone. Her face was as pure and cold as marble, with the peace of the dead laid upon it. She seemed to have grown old in a single night. All day she said little or nothing, and would not eat. She simply sat still, looking out of the east window. "No," she said gently, to Ruth, "nothing is the matter, dearie. I'm just tired." When Winfield came, she kept him away from Miss Ainslie, without seeming to do so. "Let's go for a walk," she said. She tried to speak lightly, but there was a lump in her throat and a tightening at her heart. They climbed the hill and took the side path which led to the woods, following it down and through the aisles of trees, to the log across the path. Ruth was troubled and sat there some little time without speaking. Then, suddenly, she knew that something was wrong with Carl. Her heart was filled with strange foreboding, and she vainly tried to swallow the persistent lump in her throat. She spoke to him gently, once or twice, and he did not seem to hear. "Carl!" she cried in agony, "Carl, what is it?" He tried to shake off the spell which lay upon him. "Nothing, darling," he said unsteadily, with something of the old tenderness. "I'm weak and foolish that's all." "Carl, dearest!" she cried, and then broke down, sobbing bitterly. Her tears aroused him, and he tried to soothe her. "Ruth, my darling girl, don't cry. We have each other, sweetheart, and it doesn't matter. Nothing matters in the whole wide world." After a little she regained her self control. "Come out into the sun," he said. "It's ghostly here. You don't seem real to me, Ruth." The mist filled her eyes again. "Don't, darling," he pleaded. "I'll try to tell you." They sat down on the hillside, where the sun shone brightly, and where they could see Miss Ainslie's house plainly. She waited, frightened and suffering, for what seemed an eternity, before he spoke. "Last night, Ruth," he began, "my father came to me in a dream. You know he died when I was about 12 years old, and last night I saw him as he would have been if he had lived until now, something over 60. His hair and beard were matted, and there was the most awful expression in his eyes it makes me shudder yet. He was in his grave clothes, dead and yet not dead. He was suffering. There was something he was trying to say to me, something he wanted to explain. We were out here on the hill in the moonlight, and I could see Miss Ainslie's house and hear the surf behind the cliff. All he could say to me was, 'Abby, Mary, Mary, Abby, she, Mary,' over and over again. Once he said, 'Mother.' Abby was my mother's name. "It is terrible," he went on. "I can't understand it. There is something I must do and I don't know what it is. A command is laid on me by the dead. There is some wrong for which I must atone. When I first awoke I thought it was a dream, but it isn't, it's real. It seems as though that was the real world, and this, all our love and happiness, and you, were just dreams. I can't bear it, Ruth." He shuddered and she tried to comfort him, though she was cold as a marble statue and her lips moved with difficulty. "Don't, dear," she said, "it was only a dream. I've had them sometimes, so vividly that they haunted me for days, and as you say, it seemed as if that was the real world and this the dream. I know how you feel, those things aren't pleasant, but there's nothing we can do. It makes one feel so helpless. The affairs of the day are largely under our control, but at night, when the body is asleep, the mind harks back to things that have been forgotten for years. It takes a fevered fancy as a fact and builds upon it a whole series of disasters. It gives trivial things great significance and turns life upside down. Remembering it is the worst of all." "There's something I can't get at, Ruth," he answered. "It's just out of my reach. I know it's reasonable to suppose it was a dream and that it can be explained by natural causes, but I don't dream very often." "I dream every night," she said. "Sometimes they're just silly, foolish things, and sometimes they're vivid and horrible realities that I can't forget for weeks. But surely, dear, we're not foolish enough to believe in dreams." "No, I hope not," he replied, doubtfully. "Let's go for a little walk," she said, "and we'll forget it." Then she told him how changed Miss Ainslie was, and how she had left her, sitting aimlessly by the window. "I don't think I'd better stay away long," she concluded. "She may need me." "I won't be selfish, Ruth. We'll go back now. I'm sorry Miss Ainslie isn't well." "She said she was just tired, but it isn't like her to be tired. She doesn't seem to want anybody near her. But you can sit in the garden this afternoon, if you'd like to, and I'll flit in and out, like an industrious butterfly. Some new books have just come, and I'll leave them in the arbour for you." "All right, dear, and if there's anything I can do, I hope you'll tell me." As they approached the house, a brisk little man hurried out of the gate and went toward the village. "Who's that?" asked Winfield. "I don't know. Someone who has brought something, probably. I trust she's better." Miss Ainslie seemed more like herself as she moved about the house, dusting and putting the rooms in order, as was her wont. At noon she fried a bit of chicken for Ruth, but took nothing herself except a cup of tea. "No, dearie," she said, in answer to Ruth's anxious question. "I'm all right, don't fret about me." "Have you any pain, Miss Ainslie?" "No, of course I haven't, you foolish child." She tried to smile, but her white lips quivered pitifully. In the afternoon, when she said she was cold, Ruth made a fire in the open fireplace and wheeled Miss Ainslie's favourite chair in front of it. She drew her shawl about her shoulders and leaned back. "I'm so comfortable now," she said drowsily. "I think I'm going to sleep, dear." Ruth sat by her, pretending to read, but in reality watching her closely, until the deep, regular breathing assured her that she was asleep. She went out into the garden and found Winfield